Good evening, everyone. I am Ram Mohan from Water and Livelihoods Foundation. I welcome all of you to this 3 days training program. As a part of the first day and the first session, I am going to introduce some basic concepts about groundwater budgeting, which are very much helpful to begin the water budgeting, also to look at the tool, that software tool that we have developed. So let us get on to that presentation. Let me share my screen. Hope my screen is visible to all of you. So, as a part of this first day and first session, I'm going to introduce some basic concepts about water, water cycle, rainfall, aquifers, and then we'll go to the groundwater budgeting, various components of the groundwater budgeting. If you look around us on the Earth's atmosphere, water is in constant motion. Water moves from one place to the other. Also, water changes from one form to the other. You'll find that water in the form of rain comes to us, falls on the earth, and then it travels further in the streams and nalas, and then some of it evaporates and some of it percolates and finally changes into different forms, and whatever that accumulates in the streams, rivers, finally reaches the ocean. Ocean water gets evaporated, again going back to the atmosphere. That is called a hydrological cycle. That's what we have shown it here in this picture. The starting with this precipitation or the rainfall, it falls on the earth surface and then it takes different shapes and forms, and it flows in the streams. It also flows, reaches the rivers, and then there will be some flow, and some part of it will be intercepted by the vegetative cover, and some part of it also replenishes the soil moisture. Some of it will also get recharged into the groundwater. Some of it gets taken by the trees, and then it is called the transpiration or evapotranspiration. And some of the water will get evaporated from the water bodies and then oceans and streams. And finally, it goes back to the atmosphere in terms of in the form of vapor. This vapor, water vapor, gets condensed again, forms the clouds, and then under favorable conditions, there will be rainfall taking place somewhere else. And this cycle of movement of water continues in our atmosphere. That's what we call hydrological cycle. And so, natural cyclic movement of water in our atmosphere is called the hydrological cycle. And then coming to water budgeting or the balance is nothing but quantification of different components of hydrological cycle. So we have seen different components here: the evaporation, groundwater recharge, the stream flows, precipitation. If you quantify these components and then bring them together in the form of a balanced balance or an equation, that is called water budgeting or water balance. Let us see mathematically how it is expressed. You can see here below there is precipitation here on the left hand side, and on the right hand side there is a soil moisture, there is some stream flow, there is pond storage, evaporation, transpiration, interception, and groundwater recharge. So the rainfall that is coming on the earth is taking different forms. Some of it is stored in the soil as a soil moisture, and some is stored in the pond, and later it gets, some of it is again recharging to the groundwater. So it is some of it is lost in the evaporation. Some is intercepted by the vegetation or some artificial structures, buildings, or any other things. So by taking different forms, the water is not lost, but it is only changing its shape, and then it is spatial distribution. So on the left hand side, precipitation is equal to the sum of all the components on the right hand side. Mathematically, we write water balance in this form. Then let us also understand something about the rainfall. We use this rainfall in our water budgeting calculations. We need to understand something about what is the monsoon season, how this rainfall is measured, what is the difference between these normal rainfall and then actual rainfall. First, let us come to these monsoon seasons. So in India, in predominantly the monsoon season is June to September. Hope you agree with me. June to September is the predominant monsoon season, but there are exceptions. Some places receive more rainfall during October, November, December. For example, in Tamil Nadu, there are places like Nagapattinam on the eastern coastal, northern eastern coast, and then it receives predominantly rainfall during October, November, December months, but not June, September months. But these are exceptions. I'm talking about the predominantly the monsoons are during June to September, and then we call it as a monsoon season, and then the other season, October to May, the remaining part of the year, we call it non-monsoon season. Though there is some rainfall during that period, we still call it non-monsoon because this is the predominant monsoon season, and this is not rest is the non-monsoon season. Then coming to the measurement of rainfall, see on the right side there is a picture showing the rainfall measuring gauge, which is called a rain gauge. More precisely, ordinary rain gauge, which is installed here. This part, this one, which is fenced around so that there is not it is not damaged by any people around or animals going around there. It is installed in a seems in a village, and then this is called an ordinary rain gauge. The rain that falls from the top will be collected in its inside. There is a small chamber, and then where it is gets collected every day. Morning 8 o'clock, somebody will go there and then take out that water and then put it into a measuring jar and see how much is the rainfall occurred in the last 24 hours. This is how the rainfall is recorded. There are also uh, Bureau of Indian Standard codes are available. How to install a rain gauge, how to read these rain gauge readings, and then what should be the standards of these rain gauges. So then next coming, let us come to their. You have seen this as an ordinary rain gauge, but there are also more sophisticated one. I will show you a little bit later. But first let us discuss about this normal rainfall and then actual rainfall. Actual rainfall is the rainfall that is recorded in a year. Take any year, and then when you have a record of the rainfall, the annual rainfall or seasonal rainfall or monthly rainfall, actual recorded rainfall is the rainfall. We call it. But then when it comes to normal rainfall for any given area, it means that we have taken several years of rainfall. For example, 2010, 2012, 2011, 2012, 13, 14, 15, like that for the last 11 years of rainfall, annual rainfall, and average it, then it is called the normal rainfall. So while by doing this calculation of normal rainfall, we are evening out the surplus rainfall and then deficit rainfalls over different years, and arriving at an average figure of rainfall for that area. This is called the normal rainfall. We will be using this normal rainfall as well as the actual rainfall terminology in our water budgeting. Let us go ahead and see. I have here a rain gauge, which is uh, in a very close shot. I have recorded some small short video for you. This is an automatic recording rain gauge. It is not a ordinary rain gauge. This automatic recording rain gauge will record the rainfall on a continuous basis. As and when the rain falls, there will be it notes down in the form of a graph that you see below. Let us just watch this video. So as you can see from this video, there is a chart inside, and then there is also a pen, which is writing something, recording the rainfall on that chart with time. So this is an automatic recording rain gauge. This chart is placed by somebody every day. It is recorded chart is replaced with a new one, and so the rain gauge will record the rainfall on a continuous basis, and uh, this is the chart that what you are seeing below is the for a particular day, 16th July 2018. This is collected from a place. I think near airport of Rajkot city in Gujarat. So we have taken this photograph from that rainfall records available at the IMD office located near that airport in Rajkot. So if you see this chart, how this is recorded, on the top there are numbers 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. These are hours. So morning 8 o'clock to next day morning 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock, this chart is showing. And then on the vertical axis, this is the amount of rainfall. This full amount of rainfall from here to here is 10 millimeters. So when it starts recording, let us say starting from here, there was no rain. There was no rain, but at around 12, at around 13, 13 30, that means 1:30 hours in the afternoon, there was some rainfall started, and so the pen started recording this rainfall, and then when it became 10 millimeters, then it has emptied the inside bucket. So the automatic recording rain gauge will empty that bucket, and again it start recording from the zero. Again it started some rainfall, and so it recorded up to 9 o'clock. So at 9 o'clock, if you see, this is 21 means 9 o'clock. 9, 21, 22, 23, 24. Between these hours, that means 9 o'clock to 12 o'clock in the night, this period, there was intense rainfall because there was the bucket was got filled, then emptied, got filled, emptied. The bucket got emptied again, got filled, and like that several times there were bucket got filled, and so there was so much of rainfall recorded during this period. And then later on, again, the intensity of rainfall got a little bit reduced here, and then it recorded some rainfall later, but the major part of the rainfall came at 9 o'clock, and then between say 10 o'clock there was intense rain. This is how you can read a chart, but also you can extract further information. What is the intensity of rainfall at what hour? What is the total rainfall? How it is distributed? Like that, this is very useful information that you can collect if you have this kind of a record. Otherwise, it is also for the 24 hours. What is the rainfall? This is what we normally get from the ordinary rain gauge. It is here. It is recorded as 183.8. It's really a huge rainfall for 24 hours. Then it was reported that on 16th July in 2018, Rajkot got completely flooded. It took about 3 4 days to recover. I just included it for you to get an idea about how rainfall is recorded. So let us now come to the static water levels. This is another aspect of groundwater budgeting we need to understand. What is this static water level? It is the water level in any well when there is no pumping taking place in that well. Also, when there is no pumping taking place in the neighboring wells. Ideally, within 200 meters, if there is no pumping taking place, and also the water levels have fully recovered from the earlier pumping, then when you measure that water level, it is called the static water level. Right. See the right side diagram here. I'm showing here I'm showing here the blue color one is the water table or groundwater level before pumping. But once there was pumping started in this well and this well and this well, the water levels will go down like a depression. In a three-dimensional view, you have to imagine. And then water level will fall around this well for about a radius of say 100 meters or 200 meters and then remain there as long as it is being pumped. And once the pumping will be stopped, then the water levels will come back slowly to the normalcy and then will reach the water table back. This particular area where under the influence of well pumping, there is a depression is formed. This is called the cone of depression. The same thing I am showing here in the two-dimensional cross-sectional view. This is the static water level before pumping in the bore well, let us say. And then once the well started pumping, water level will go down like this, and further water level will go down like this with time. But after some time, the water level will reach this place and it will remain stable. It will not go further down because the amount of water that is being extracted from this well is equal to the amount of water given by the aquifer to this well. So it is equal, and so the water levels have stabilized. So this particular water level is called pumping water level. This particular level is called the pumping water level, and then this particular level is called the static water level. Then let us also understand about how this static water level is measured. For example, in case of an open well, it is much easier to see, and then you can see the where is the water, and then measure also easily using a measuring tape or even using a rope and then tying some small stone to it, and then trying to easily you can get the how much what is the depth of water below the ground level. But for in the case of bore wells, they are much deeper because they could be 100 feet, 200, 300, 600 feet also deeper, and we don't know, we can't see where is the water level. So there are certain kind of simple as well as more sophisticated equipments are available for us. Here what you see on the right below is that kind of an equipment, which is a very simple one. It is called water level indicator. It will have, it's a battery operated. There is a tape here attached to it, and there are marked the distance is marked on this in terms of meters or feet, and then at the end there is a probe attached to this one. This is the probe. It is a metallic one, and so once you insert this one, you drop this probe into the water, into the bore well. When it touches the water table, then immediately it makes a sound, a beep sound. You can hear that, and so the record of water level below the ground level can be easily recorded. That's how water level recorders, water level indicator works. But there are also more sophisticated ones. Automatic water level recorders are available, as well as now there is something called IoT based water level recorders are also coming, where this there will be a multi-sensor based ones are also available. A sensor will be there which will be dropped inside. It will be placed. It is there installed inside the borewell, and then it can measure the water level. It can also report the pH of the water, various other parameters like electrical conductivity, turbidity, and then all that data can be transmitted directly to your computer. So you can take the data and straight away start analysis of that. That kind of sophistication is also possible, but here we are. The simplest thing is water level indicator, and for our job that will be enough for us. Then we come to the aquifers. There is a need for understanding what is an aquifer and how these aquifers are classified. Because while doing water budgeting, we have to understand and choose what is my aquifer that I am dealing with, and we have to also choose some parameters related to aquifer. So let me introduce the very basic concept of what is this aquifer. Aquifer is a geological formation that could absorb, store, and transmit water by means of their interconnected pore spaces are and fractures. This is the very, very simple definition of an aquifer. That means it is not that anything that below the ground level, any rock formation, any rocky soil or any rocky formation is not an aquifer. It should have certain basic characteristics. Which are these characteristics? These are the three characteristics. One is that it should be able to absorb water. Another one is it should be able to store water within this aquifer, the pore spaces. Third is that it should be able to also transmit water. That means it should be able to give water out to the wells. If it satisfies, then it is called an aquifer. There are certain materials which can absorb water, which can store water, but then they cannot transmit water. So then it is not called an aquifer. So, for example, take the case of a typically a clay. Clay can take absorb a lot of water. It can store for a long period of time, but it cannot transmit. So then we don't call it aquifer, but we call it something else. I'll come to that later. So now let us see the two broad types of aquifers. So the aquifers, by their material, the material that they are formed of, we can classify them into two types. One is that alluvial aquifer, another one is the hard rock aquifer. Alluvial aquifer is basically something that is formed by the rivers carrying a lot of silt along with that sand, silt, and then mud over a long period of time, hundreds of years. That silt is deposited, and then in terms of layers and layers, and then you have a geological formation called alluvial aquifer. This is typically we see in the coastal areas, in the delta areas of rivers, also say in the Gangetic Plains, all that in Bihar, all that in North Bihar, the river floodplain areas. We can say that even from right from Punjab on the western side to the West Bengal here on the east, the entire the Gangetic basin. It consists of a lot of different alluvial formations. Then, in contrast to that, hard rock aquifers are made up of, as it says, that hard rocks, rocky formations. It contains different kinds of rocks like granites or basalts or something else, sandstone, limestones. So there is also another kind of classification people talk about is the soft rocks. And there are varieties of much more deeper, much more complex system of classifying the rocks and then aquifers. But for our purpose, let us make it much more simpler. And so we have divided only into two types. So the hard rock aquifers are formed primarily from the rocks, but there are fractures in the rocks. There are certain fractures, gaps, and then pores, and then empty places between these rock pieces, and that allows the water to occupy and then transmit. That means even these rocks can absorb water, store water, and transmit water. So they are hard rock aquifers. This is the primary classification, and then now let us come to the right side, the picture, and the another kind of classification. So here now I talk about the classification by function, by the way it behaves. So this is what I'm talking about. By the way it functions, and then the way it behaves. The first thing is that a confined aquifer. Here is a confined aquifer where there is a water predominantly is flowing horizontally here, let us say. There is a basement here. Basement means a hard rock without any openings in that. So it is a massive basement hard rock. And then also on the top it is confined by a clay, let us say a clay bed, a clay layer. And so this aquifer is confined on the bottom as well as on the top uh, by some other materials, and so it is called a confined aquifer. In this confined aquifer, water started somewhere else. We don't know. It is very expansive areas, and somewhere it got exposed and it got recharged. Somewhere this water is entering into it, and then this confined aquifer uh, is appearing here, and then water flows under higher pressure in these aquifers, and then this aquifer is fully saturated. So such kind of things are called confined aquifers. We also have confined aquifers, we come across them. Some wells tap them. Some much deeper wells they tap these confined aquifers. Then the second kind of aquifer is the unconfined aquifer. In the diagram, let us come back. Let me erase all this. Here above this layer, there is something up to here, a formation which is confined below, but it is not confined above. It is open to the atmosphere. Whatever the rainfall comes here will seep through this topsoil. It will improve the soil moisture, and later, slowly, the further downward movement of groundwater will take place, and then it will reach and replenish our groundwater here. So this is the water table. This kind of aquifer is called unconfined because it is not confined from the top. it is open to the atmosphere. This is the unconfined aquifer that we generally tap in case of open wells. In case of shallow wells, bore wells, here in this part of this unconfined aquifer, it is completely saturated with water. The material is saturated with water, but above this part is not saturated. This is unsaturated, partly saturated. This unsaturated or partly saturated area is something that agriculture people deal with, the root zone, and how moisture comes into this root zone, how much is used, how much is available for the plants, and things like that. But for the hydrogeology and then for the purpose of groundwater budgeting, and this is the part that we mostly deal with. This is the unconfined aquifer part. So we have now discussed the two, confined and unconfined. So let us now come to this equitard here. So this layer that we have already shown here in color, in black color, say let us say this is a material like a clay which can absorb water, which can store, but which cannot transmit. We call them equitards. So they cannot transmit water through them. So the water here in the unconfined aquifer cannot pass through it and then reach the confined aquifer below. Sorry, this is called an equitard. That means which retards the movement. Tard, equitard. It retards the movement of water through it. But in theoretical sense, it is completely waterproof. That means it cannot transmit any water. But in many practical situations, these kind of formations, the clayey formations, also can transmit some amount of water, maybe negligible, some small amount of water. That they are called leaky aquifers. They 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 also could transmit some part of the water from the top to the below, in practical sense. In such cases, wherever there is some amount of water passing through from the top to the bottom, then we call semi-confined conditions or semi-confined aquifer. In such cases, this is called semi-confined aquifer. Earlier we called confined aquifer. Now I am calling it a semi-confined one because it is confined at the bottom, but at the top it is confined by a clay layer, but it is still some amount of water is leaking through it from the unconfined aquifer. That is why it is semi-confined. This is how we look at these aquifer terminologies, and this much is enough if we want to do groundwater budgeting. And more discussion about different kinds of aquifers and their properties will, anyway, we have to look at them while doing these discussions about the water budgeting tool, and that will be done in the session 2 tomorrow. So now let us go to the next slide, which is the last slide, I think. Also, it is about groundwater balance. So far now, we have discussed about hydrological cycle and water balance, right from uh, the precipitation on one side and then all the other components on the right hand side, equating these two in mathematically. But now I am looking at only the groundwater budgeting, groundwater balance aspects alone. So that part of the rainfall which enters the groundwater, and how much I am actually using out of that groundwater. So that is the extraction component. So I am primarily only looking at two components now. One is the extraction component, another one is the recharge component. Let me elaborate more, and starting from the extraction of groundwater. We extract groundwater using wells. So one is the open, could be open well, it could be a bore well, a tube well, a shallow tube well, a much more deeper tube well. These are the extraction mechanisms, and then we extract them for irrigation purposes. Some water is taken out from for irrigation purpose, some is for domestic purpose. Sometimes we also take for industrial purpose and something for transporting to outside also. Some people extract and then fill some tankers and then send it out from these basins. So these are the four kinds of extractions. And then coming to the other side, the recharge components. See here I have taken a small area. This is the ridge line of that area, and there is this is the ridge line, and there is some land mass is there, land is there, some agriculture land, something. Also, there is some drainage lines are visible here. Rainfall that occurs on this accumulates and then passes through smaller streams, and finally it reaches the bigger stream, and this is the outlet. And so it is a typical watershed area. Need not be a watershed, but also these all principles that we are discussing now also are applicable to any area. It could be an administrative unit or it could be a part of an urban area. But now, for the purpose of illustration, I am taking a watershed area. So, in this watershed area, you could see that there is some agriculture land. There are some wells here. And here there are some water storage structures are also there. There's a check dam here where there is some accumulation of water behind it. There is also one irrigation tank I am showing here. There is a canal taking off from this irrigation tank and which supplies water, irrigation water to some crops. So now let us look at the different forms of recharge that takes place to the groundwater. The recharge takes place in several forms. The predominant form is the rainfall recharge. That means rainfall, when it directly goes and then recharges, that is called the rainfall recharge. This is the first thing, rainfall recharge. Let us call it this number one, first component. The rainfall that is falling here on this landmass will replenish the soil moisture, improve the soil moisture, and later on it further goes down, percolates. And so this is the recharge that directly takes place from the entire area like this. It goes down, it replenishes the topsoils and then improves the soil moisture, and further it will reach this unconfined aquifer we just discussed. And then, if possible, some small part also may percolate through this aquitard. And then this is called the confined aquifer that we already discussed. But mostly, it is this part. It is this part that unconfined aquifer it will reach, and then it will increase the groundwater storage. So the rainfall recharge is the first component. And then let us discuss now about the recharge from water conservation structures. This as the second component. Water conservation structure, it could be a check dam, an earthen dam, or any barrier that is built across the stream to accumulate, stores water for some time. So maybe that water is used for some purpose. But here, whatever water that accumulates also will allow some recharge by percolation below the bed of that storage. So that recharge is called the recharge from water conservation structures. Then let us come to the third component, recharge from tanks and ponds. So here I am showing some a small pond, this one. Let us say it is an irrigation tank. Also, it is supplying some water through a canal. So there is a water stored in this tank, and so there is some recharge also taking place from its bed to the groundwater. So that is called the recharge from tanks and ponds. That component. And then further, when there is a canal and then canal is supplying irrigation water to the crops around, there is some seepage also taking place from the canal bed, and that is called the fourth component, canal seepage. So when we are applying this irrigation water from this tank through this canal, some water is actually absorbed by the plants, and of course it is again released as the transpiration, goes back to the atmosphere. But some water which is applied by this canal will be recharging to the groundwater. So that is called the return flow from the surface water irrigation. So we have some return flow from the irrigation water applied. That is the fifth component. Then the last component of the recharge is the sixth one, the return flow from the groundwater irrigated Earlier, I said it is the canal surface water irrigated. Groundwater that is extracted from these open end borewells will will be consumed by the plants. In fact, plants they very little they consume. They take the water through their roots and then they release into the atmosphere through their leaves. Through that means the transpiration. But some part of that water will still also percolate again to the groundwater. So it is called the return flow. Return flow from the groundwater irrigation. So we have got altogether six components. So for recharge, there are four components: irrigation, domestic, industrial, and transportation to outside. For recharge, there are six components. Sorry, I said recharge. Maybe extraction, there are four components, and then recharge, six components. So if we could quantify these four plus six components, then we will be able to balance them and then calculate what is the groundwater usage now, whether we are extracting more than what is being recharged, whether extraction is more than recharge or recharge is more than extraction. Am I extracting more than what is the recharge taking place from the rainfall? If the extraction is more, whether we can reduce some extraction or use water more efficiently, and such kind of analysis and understanding can be developed based on these quantifications. Another important parameter that we also calculate in the groundwater budgeting or balancing is that we take the ratio of extraction to the recharge. Extraction divided by recharge into 100. That means the amount of extraction as a fraction of recharge we calculate. Extraction by recharge as a percentage. If it is coming as 70%, that means extraction is about 70% of the recharge that is taking place. If it is coming as 150%, it indicates that you are extracting 50% more than the annual recharge that is taking place. That means you are exploiting the storage. So, if extraction minus recharge equal to change in the storage, this is the primary equation that is used in the groundwater balance. If extraction is equal to recharge, then there is no change in the storage. So you are protecting the storage and the aquifers. But if you continue to extract more and more groundwater, more than the recharge, then one day the aquifer will be empty and completely all the wells will go dry, affecting all the economic activities associated with these four activities here: the extraction, various industrial irrigation, and then transportation needs. So that's how we come to the end of these introduction to the basic concepts about the groundwater budgeting, and then we will continue this discussion after a break with this groundwater budgeting tool, the Excel based groundwater budgeting tool.